$700 million. That's how much a single month of low water on the Mississippi River costs the American economy. Right now, not in a projections report, not in a future forecast. Right now, water levels in key stretches of this river are dropping. And the last time this happened at scale, grocery store shelves started going empty before most people even knew there was a problem. The Mississippi River moves 60% of all U.S. grain exports. Corn, soybeans, wheat. The food the world depends on. It doesn't travel by truck. It doesn't travel by train. It travels on barges, floating down this river, through the port of New Orleans, and onto cargo ships bound for every continent on Earth. But here's the thing nobody tells you. Those barges need water to float, and right now, that water is disappearing. When river levels drop just 2 feet below normal, barge operators have to lighten their loads, sometimes by 30, 40, even 50%. You need twice as many barges to move the same amount of cargo. The cost explodes, delays cascade, and somewhere down the chain, farmers lose money, exporters miss contracts, and the countries that bought that grain start looking for other suppliers. We're not talking about a weather inconvenience. We're talking about a supply chain failure in slow motion. Here's what no one can answer yet. Is this a drought year? Or is this the new normal? Because the data from the Army Corps of Engineers tells one story, the data from NOAA tells another, and the farmers in Iowa and Missouri, the people who actually live next to this river, they'll tell you something is different, something has shifted. The question isn't just whether the barges get stranded this year. The question is, has America already broken the system it depends on most and just hasn't felt it yet? We're not going to answer that yet, because first, you need to understand how we got here. The Mississippi River has been America's superhighway since before America was America. Indigenous nations used it for trade. French explorers mapped it. And the moment the Industrial Revolution kicked in, the United States did something remarkable. It turned a wild, flooding, unpredictable river into the most efficient bulk cargo system in human history. Locks, levees, dredges, channel markers. The Army Corps of Engineers spent over a century bending this river to their will, carving a 9-foot deep navigation channel from Minneapolis all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. 12,000 miles of connected waterway, over 1,000 barges operating at any given time. It was an engineering miracle. But every miracle comes with a hidden cost. In 1988, the country got its first serious warning. A severe drought dropped river levels so low that barges ran aground across a 1,000-mile stretch. Grain shipments collapsed. Emergency dredging operations ran 24 hours a day. The government spent hundreds of millions of dollars just to keep the channel passable. People called it a once-in-a-generation crisis. Then it happened again in 2012. River levels at Memphis fell to their lowest point in recorded history, since they'd been measuring. Over 100 barges were delayed on a single stretch near Thebes, Illinois. Shipping rates quadrupled overnight. Farmers who had already sold their crops at fixed prices suddenly couldn't move them. Some lost everything. People called that a once-in-a-generation crisis too. And now the warning flags are rising again. The upper Mississippi is experiencing below normal precipitation for the 3rd year in a row. Snowpack in the northern headwaters, the lifeblood of the river's summer flow, came in critically low. The Missouri River, one of the Mississippi's biggest tributaries, is running at levels that river management agencies describe, quietly, as concerning. Drought conditions aren't a prediction anymore. They're already mapped across the basin. Let's start local, because the local consequences alone should stop you cold. In Cairo, Illinois, a small town at the confluence of the Mississippi and Ohio rivers, the economy is the river. Barge terminals, grain elevators, industrial suppliers. When water levels drop, work stops. Businesses that have operated for generations start making cuts. 50 miles north, in Cape Girardeau, river pilots are watching gauges every single morning. These are men and women who've navigated this river for 20, 30 years, and they'll tell you The windows of safe passage are getting shorter and harder to predict. But scale up. Now we're talking about the grain belt: Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, Minnesota. These states produce a combined agricultural output worth over $100 billion a year. A significant portion of that production moves to market on the Mississippi. When the river chokes, that system doesn't just slow down, it backs up. Grain elevators fill to capacity. Farmers can't move product. Storage costs mount. And when exports stall, global commodity prices start to feel the pressure. Now scale up further. Egypt imports roughly 60% of its wheat. Much of it comes from the United States. When Mississippi shipping rates spike, and they do spike during drought years, sometimes 300 to 400% above baseline, the price that Egypt pays for that wheat goes up. Lebanon, Indonesia, Nigeria, Bangladesh, countries that are already running thin food security margins suddenly find their budgets stretched even thinner because a river in the middle of North America couldn't float enough barges. This is not theoretical. This is documented. This is the economic shockwave that flows downstream from a drought on the Mississippi, and it reaches shores that most Americans have never thought about. Let's put the scale into language you can actually picture. A single river barge carries about 1,500 tons of cargo. That's the equivalent of 58 semi-trucks. When water levels drop and operators have to reduce loads by 40%, that's like losing 23 trucks per barge. Multiply that across hundreds of barges, and you've just pulled tens of thousands of trucks worth of capacity off the system overnight. Now imagine trying to replace that with actual trucks. There aren't enough. The roads can't handle it. The fuel costs alone would be catastrophic. Estimates suggest trucking the volume currently moved by Mississippi barges would require an additional 500,000 truck trips and add over $7 billion in transportation costs annually. This river isn't just convenient, it's structural, it's load-bearing. Remove it, even partially, and the architecture of American food logistics starts to crack. This isn't alarmism. This is the consensus from the people who manage the river for a living. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers runs continuous low water response protocols. Protocols they didn't used to need this frequently. Their dredging fleet operates on rotating standby near the most vulnerable choke points: Cairo, Thebes, and the stretch below St. Louis that has historically run shallow first. NOAA's long-range drought outlook shows expanded drought conditions across the upper basin, with below normal precipitation probabilities extending well into the coming months. And hydrologists at institutions like the USGS have published increasingly direct warnings. The Mississippi River Basin is experiencing a structural decline in average discharge, the total volume of water flowing through at any given time, tied to a combination of land use changes, reduced snowpack, and shifting precipitation patterns. One researcher, in a 2023 paper that got almost no mainstream attention, called the Mississippi's long-term flow trajectory a slow-moving infrastructure crisis hiding in plain sight. Plain sight. Hiding. Because we only look at this river when it's flooding. We never look at it when it's dying. Meet the towboat captains. These are the people who push 30, 40, sometimes 50 barges at a time down the river, linked together into a floating island the size of several city blocks. They navigate by feel as much as by instrument. They know the river's bends, its shoals, its moods. And right now, more of them are getting stuck. In 2022, during a severe fall drought, dozens of tow operators were delayed for days near the Memphis and Baton Rouge stretches. The cost of a single delayed barge trip runs into the tens of thousands of dollars. Multiply by an entire system in gridlock, and you're looking at losses that hit the commodity markets within 48 hours. The grain farmers are where it gets personal. A corn farmer in southern Illinois might have a crop worth $800,000 sitting in a grain bin. He's already sold futures contracts, promised delivery by a certain date at a certain price. If the river is too low to move his grain to the Gulf, he faces a brutal choice: pay sky-high truck freight rates and eat the margin, or miss delivery and face contract penalties. Either way, he loses, and his neighbor loses, and the next farm over loses. Then the rural banks that loan to those farmers start seeing stress in their portfolios. The equipment dealers slow down. The small towns along the river that depend on barge traffic for their economic pulse, they start to hollow out, just a little bit more. All of it traced back to water levels. All of it traceable to a gauge reading on a river most people only think about during flood season. They're not sitting still, they're trying to fix it. The Army Corps of Engineers has emergency low water response plans that activate when river gauge readings hit certain trigger points. They rush dredges to the shallow spots, massive machines that scoop sediment from the riverbed and pump it to the banks, buying a few extra inches of depth. A few inches, that's the margin they're working with. Emergency dredging operations during the 2022 drought ran around the clock at key bottlenecks. The cost? Tens of millions of dollars. The result? Marginal. They bought time. They kept the channel technically open, but they couldn't reverse what nature had done. Some experts have proposed more radical solutions. Deeper channel modification, permanently widening and deepening key bottleneck sections. Estimated cost? Billions of dollars. Timeline? Decades. And even then, if precipitation patterns continue to shift, you may just be building a deeper channel for a river that has less water to put in it. There are proposals to increase water storage in the upper basin, more reservoirs, better snowpack management in the headwater regions. Sensible on paper, but contested by environmental groups, complicated by interstate water compacts, and stalled by the sheer political inertia of getting 10 states to agree on anything. And then there's the solution nobody talks about out loud: rationing the river. Deciding in some structured way who gets to move what and when during low water emergencies. Agriculture, petroleum, coal, chemical shipments. The river moves all of them. It cannot always move all of them simultaneously at full capacity. That conversation about river triage is happening quietly in Washington, in Army Corps briefing rooms, in USDA logistics planning sessions. It's not in any press release. Here's the part that should keep you up at night. Everything we've talked about, the stranded barges, the spiking freight costs, the farmer losses, the global food price ripple, that all happens during a bad drought year. But climate projections for the Mississippi Basin don't describe one bad year, they describe a long-term drying trend. The upper Midwest, the catchment area that feeds the river its water, is projected to experience more frequent, more severe drought cycles through mid-century. The snowpack that historically released water slowly through spring and early summer, keeping levels stable during peak shipping season, is declining. Warmer winters, less snow, more evaporation, faster runoff when rain does come, too fast to be absorbed, too fast to replenish groundwater, rushing straight into the river in flood pulses instead of steady, reliable flow. What this means is that the average Mississippi River, not the drought year Mississippi, the regular, normal, daily Mississippi, may be carrying less water every decade. Not dramatically less, not visibly less to the naked eye. Just enough less that the 9-foot navigation channel the Corps of Engineers has maintained for 80 years is increasingly hard to guarantee. And here's the thing about infrastructure built on tight margins. It doesn't fail dramatically, it fails incrementally, gradually, expensively. Freight rates that used to spike only in extreme drought years start spiking more often. The window of reliable navigation gets shorter. Export contracts get harder to guarantee. American agricultural competitiveness, which has been built partly on cheap river transport that no other country can replicate, quietly erodes. Brazil is already eating into U.S. grain market share. They've been building port infrastructure and inland waterway capacity for years. If American soy and corn becomes chronically more expensive to ship because the Mississippi keeps running low, those markets don't wait for us to fix our river. They just buy from someone else.